the go live though. Well, hello and welcome this afternoon to the final discussion, I think this is going to be, at least for the moment, about advertising to get more people to listen to our podcast. If you've been following along with Can I Make a Hit podcast, then you know that I've been doing a whole bunch of tests to see if I can get this to work, to see what kind of result I can get, and to see how much it would actually cost to get people to subscribe to my podcast. And you'll also know, if you've been following along the series, I've had some pretty mixed results, and I'm going to run through some of those today. But I'm really excited because this is one of these live panel shows, which you are most welcome to ask questions to my guests to as well, and also share your stories with us too. But this is an opportunity for us to have a bit of a discussion about what we found trying to advertise to get listeners to our podcasts, whether it's worked in different scenarios, whether it hasn't, and what perhaps you can learn to avoid making some of the mistakes that we've experienced. So I'm absolutely delighted to say that I'm joined by three wonderful podcasters today who I'm going to let introduce themselves in just a few moments. But the first thing I want to do is to actually go straight into the experiences. So we're going to start off with each of our panelists. You can see them in turn. We've got Phil Better, first of all, on the left there from Invest in Yourself Pod. We've got Michael Liddicoat from DissectingTheDeal.com, and we've got Tommy's Outdoors from TommyOutdoors.com. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves though as we go along. What we're going to do is go through each one, then we'll have a bit of a discussion, then we'll go on to the next case study, and then we'll go on to the next case study, and then we'll round up from there. But as I say, I'm watching YouTube live as well, so if you are watching live today rather than the recording that I'll be putting out a little bit later, then feel free to ask any questions that you like. But let's start straight away then and head over to Phil. And Phil, can you tell us your experiences?
All right, so my name is Phil Better, as Richard said. I host the Invest in Yourself, the Digital Entrepreneur podcast, where I interview different entrepreneurs in the digital world. I didn't do Facebook ads, I didn't do Spotify ads. I decided to go straight to podcasters and pay podcasters to play a little 30-second intro into their, or a little 30-second ad in their episode wherever they wanted. I had 3 podcasts that helped me with that. I had the Just Two Idiots podcast, Historical Canadian podcast, and the AFC South Fan Battle podcast that helped me out there. I made a budget of about $50, and it was like $15 each podcast. So I ended up having $5 left over. And the mistake I made with these podcasts, they're general podcasts and they're not in the niche that I'm in. So they're like, one's just 2 friends talking about random stuff, one's more about historical Canadian stuff, and then obviously the AFC Southbound Battle is a football, specifically the South, AFC South. So there's limited there, but thinking maybe someone would be like it, like the idea of learning how to be an entrepreneur. The podcasts, I asked them to send me their last 3 months of stats. I started in December reaching out, and I made pays for January, February, and March, 2 episodes each month. And for the $15, I got some of their stats, so I could see okay, where would be the listening coming from. I've had mixed results. For $15, I think it was a well investment because I helped fellow podcasters. And for the month of January, I went the full month without having 1 month without a download. So the days they released, I did see a little bit of a bump, not huge, like maybe 2 or 4 listens, but it I guess whenever someone listened back to their episodes, it continued the funnel there. So I was really interested in that, and now I'm looking at going strictly to podcasts that are in my niche of digital entrepreneurs and putting it there, paying for ads there to see if that will boost my listens.
That's really interesting. My immediate thought on that was, how did you decide who you wanted to target with that? And did you just email them, or how did you approach them?
So I'm actually part of a lot of podcast support groups because from my first podcast, The Phil Better Show, I wanted to learn how to do podcasting. So I joined a whole bunch, And one of them was an offshoot of another podcast it's called The Weekly Planet. It's now a full-blown podcast network with multiple Australian podcasts on it. It's called the Weekly Planet Network, or Big Sandwich now. And through that podcast group, I was one of the original members of a Podmates group. So we're all considered mates, Australian mates. So we're podcast mates. So we started there, and I just put in, I'm like, hey, I want to give $15 for 3 months. Who's interested? It's a experiment I'm trying. And so like 2 people popped up and they said yes. And that was the Historical Canada and the Just Two Idiots podcast. And the AFC, funny enough, for some reason, I just got an invite to the group. So I jumped into the group, started learning a bit about football. And then I'm like, hey, does anybody have a podcast? And then one person said yes. And that was the Fan Battle. And I said, here, $15, give me some stats, and here you go with the ad. So it seems to be working. I've had some weird spikes randomly, and I don't know if that's from the episodes or from me posting, because being the idiot that I was, I posted in different groups about an episode and it just popped off. So that was interesting, I found too, and I'm going to be doing that more this month and seeing specifically if I can get one episode above 1,000 downloads.
Yeah, it's really hard to see, isn't it? Exactly when it works. Mm-hmm. Tommy, I saw you nodding there. What were you thinking?
Me?
No, Tommy.
Sorry.
Say it again.
I saw you nodding there. What was it? Your
where I was nodding because what Phil mentioned, these random spikes, and that's exactly what happened when you post on some forums, or like you had like all of a sudden has a traffic, and also what I've noticed that those spikes are often caused or followed by sort of unsolicited emails saying like, oh, we can give you 10,000 subscribers, only pay us this much and this much, and this is like kind of cocaine under the door, and then pay us. So this is kind of my experience as well, that these random spikes could happen either through random posts or just someone is targeting you as a potential customer.
Yeah, Michael, have you got any thoughts on Phil's story as well? Anything that you can relate to there particularly?
Yeah, I think that for me the networking component has been super interesting and helpful. What I have done that's seen a better result than the Facebook advertising has been to just keep my guests consistently informed. So it's been doing the things of letting them know, like, hey, guess what? You moved up a spot in our top ranking. Way to go. You're now number 5. Here's something. And I've been playing around with ideas of how to keep those folks engaged. What I had been doing involving Facebook specifically was actually doing targeted advertising.
Because we'll come across to you, and so you can tell us your specific. I just meant in terms of what Phil had done and what he had found there in terms of reaching out to individual podcasters perhaps and seeing that sort of results.
So I was getting... I haven't tried Phil's exact approach of getting people to advertise my podcast. I have had a lot of luck in getting guests by doing what Phil has been doing, is just being in support groups, talking to people, networking around. That's been really helpful. And of course, in an interview style podcast, your guest is going to bring in people in order to get you. And I would say that's where I see my spikes coming from is depending on the person I interview, it goes, oh, well, they have a huge following, so there's my spike. That's where they came from.
Brilliant. So Phil's first one is about reaching out to people individually, saying, I've got a certain amount of money, would you like to do it? But then also the point you're making now, I'm getting from that, is that you really need to target the right podcast in the right demographic so that it's a natural flow. That's one of the experiences I had as well. Let's go to you, Michael, then. Please do tell us your story about what you've learned from trying to promote your podcast with advertising.
So Dissecting the Deal came out of a monthly meetup group that I was doing for real estate investors. So for over 2 years, I was hosting a monthly meetup. We had investors getting together, talking about real estate, doing networking, all that sort of stuff. And one of the things I did was something called Dissecting the Deal, where we would come in and we would look at real estate and we'd just talk about it. So then COVID hits. state says we can't do anything in person. We tried doing some Zoom meetings, breakout rooms, other sort of stuff. It just didn't feel like what people wanted to do. So then I had the epiphany of like, well, dissecting the deal is this cool thing that I can do to just take that content, continue to keep my members engaged so that when we get out of the pandemic, people will still be like, oh yeah, I've been listening to this. I still want to go to the in-person meetups. So I had experience using Facebook as a tool to get people to our in-person meetups and drive people to come physically. And so when I was first doing it, I thought, oh, well, Facebook, I'll get the exact same results that I was getting of being able to drive people in to our in-person that I was trying to do for the podcast. And what I started to do is I would actually try to help my guests by targeting their specific area around them to try and boost them and say, hey, here's Phil, he's been on our show. Let me push, to some social media around there and try and get people to come from your neck of the woods so I could show them value, right? Be like, hey, by the way, we had, so many people from this campaign that also clicked and discovered you by being on the show and doing that stuff. And the rate of return wasn't super awesome for just static ads. What I did find successful was taking the Zoom video and making sort of 15 or 30 second, clips of them speaking about something as a teaser, and then getting people to do those. My rate of return was pretty steep though for me. It was about 1 click through per $5 spent.
Yeah.
And that was with the, super hyper focused on their market, their area stuff. And so then I started trying to do something. Then I got in and just started pushing the website more through targeted advertising instead of trying to focus on getting people to click to then go to the direct link to the podcast. And that was yielding some better results.
Everyone else, any thoughts on that? I mean, I have to say from my own point of view, as I'm about to say in a second, is that Facebook for me was coming up with a very similar sort of result as you again there, Michael.
Let me tell a moment. I like what Michael was doing with the teasing. I think that's the static ads for podcasts don't really work because it's an audio thing. It's like for a trailer for a movie, you can see the poster, but it does nothing. But when you see the trailer, you get hyped. So hearing that Michael went into going with the audio ads and the video, just wondering, did you ever look at using Headliner?
No, I didn't look at using Headliner. What I was doing was literally just using the Zoom video, cutting out 15 to 30 second bites. I would do a static image at the front so that they would see, essentially what it was. And you and I had talked about it previously. Yeah. It was a real surprisingly efficient when I converted those into YouTube to getting me click-through results on YouTube stuff. Because it was just like, here's the face of my guest, here's the topic of what they're talking about, and here's the link to click through. And that was getting a lot of through traffic into the YouTube channel for stuff. And then it would go into like the really interesting thing they would say, another static, another interesting thing they would say, and then close on a static. And again, those were really getting good results, but man, it took a long time to edit and put those together rather than just putting everything up on YouTube and be like, all right, here's the full thing, let the algorithm take it.
Yeah, were those promoted videos or were they organic though?
No, they were promoted.
Right.
Oh, I'm sorry. The YouTube was not promoted. The YouTube has all been organic stuff. But those 30 to 15 seconds, those were 100% I was paying for those and promoting and putting them out. And again, wasn't super, $5 to get a click through was pretty steep.
Tommy, you do a lot of these little clips, don't you? Because they've caught my eye quite a few times because you really grab a nice soundbite from someone that sort of makes me go, wow, that's really interesting. Have you tried promoting any of those, putting any money behind any of those?
No, I mean, those clips are mainly aimed at YouTube audience. And because, on YouTube, not a lot of people have a premium version of YouTube where you can stream. So, trying to get people to listen to the hour or 2 hour video is kind of hard. So I thought this is a good idea to actually introduce them. What are the, subjects or topics we talk about in the podcast? And then if they're interested, they can either, click a link and go to the video itself, or they say, oh, there's a podcast actually. And they may go ahead and listen to it on their way to work or whatever they're commuting these days.
Yeah. let's go to you, Tommy, and hear your story.
Yeah, sure. So my podcast is called Tommy's Outdoors, and I talk about outdoor pursuits like hunting, fishing, hiking, sailing, and what have you. And also the big part, especially recently, of the podcast are interviews with scientists and ecologists and researchers, where we talk about issues concerning either nature conservation or other social or political aspects that then impacting those outdoor pursuits down the line, right? So, for example, if you're a salmon angler, you might be interested in salmon conservation status and what are the projects and what's happening, even to engage on your local level, and then at the end of the day have a better results when you go out fishing. So with the ads, I really hear, thanks to Richard, and really, I was running Facebook ads about probably 2.5 years ago, when with very poor results, to be honest. Oh, maybe that was just high expectations. And then I stumbled across Richard's little exercise, and I thought, like, well, I might give Facebook ads another chance. And see how it goes, and that's how I ended up here. So I have a few numbers for you, and my podcast goes kind of like in a 2-week cycle. So the cycle goes like there's a week of the premiere, and then there's a next week where there's nothing, and essentially going with the latest episode after the previous one, and then the third week when I'm premiering another episode. So for my exercise, I actually started promoting an episode of the podcast in the third week, together with premiering another episode, kind of to be able to compare the results that I have in the week when I was promoting it with the week when I had a premiere. And when you're premiering that, all the sites that you hosting your podcast are kind of promoting that in itself. Like my website is on the WordPress, so on the day when I'm publishing podcasts, I see a lot of spikes from like WordPress Reader, which means that WordPress is putting that out. And so to be able to compare my results with the premiere week and then the week after a premiere, when there was like no boost from the platforms that are hosting the podcast. So the strategy I got is I haven't got after subscribers, because I think that idea of trying to get the subscribers from the ad is fundamentally flawed, and we can get into that, why I think that later on if we have time. Instead, I decided to promote an episode of the podcast for 2 reasons. First of all, I can promote a page on my website dedicated to the podcast. So every episode of the podcast is a dedicated page on my website. And on that page, I have a little bit of a text that describes what's in the podcast. There's an embedded player with the sound. There are buttons to go on, Spotify and whatnot. And then there's an embedded video on YouTube as well. So driving people to that page allows them to basically choose what media and how they want to consume that, and see if they like, and so that was the idea. And the other thing is, because I have quite a large spread of the subjects, right? And people who are interested in hunting deer in UK or in Ireland, they're probably not that interested in conservation of salmon, or people who are interested in conservation salmon, they might not be that interested in a situation in elephants in Kruger Park in Africa, or situation with elephants in Botswana. So it makes sense to target audience for the specific episode of the podcast, and this is what I've done. And by the way, in setting up Facebook ads, for me, by far the most important aspect, and the aspect I like the most, is that section where you can target audience, where you can limit the audience with geographically. So I was promoting an episode about rewilding in Scotland. So straight away you go to UK and Ireland, and you go for all the people who are interested in wildlife and conservation and nature loving and all these sorts of things, right? So I set up those ads, 2 ads. One with which is pretty much like a thumbnail or this generated page of the podcast itself, and the other one just swap the image. On the one it was the image of wolf, and the other was the image of lynx, if that matters. So I I get with a massive budget of €5 per day, and I decided to run this ad campaign for 5 days. Okay, and so I give you a little bit of a percentage points results that I've got. So just for comparison, the week after the premiere without ads. So I'm going to give you two sets of numbers. I'm going to compare my week with ads to premiere week, and I'm going to give you ad numbers on the ads week to the week after the premiere. Okay, and I split those numbers between hits on my actual page on the website, my track on my audio track for podcast, and my YouTube were with hits and watch time. Okay, so first the track that was promoted itself in the ad week, I saw almost 600% spike versus the premiere week. And then almost 5,000% spike versus week after the premiere. Obviously, this is like 5,000%. Oh my God, what is this? Like you got to remember that there's a lot of people who are just click, look, what's that, and they move on, right? So, and you see some evidence for that looking at the actual downloads on the track itself, where in the ad week there were only 29% of what was happening in a premiere week, and only 51% of what was happening in a podcast in a after premiere week. Which I'm gonna talk to that why I think they're so low. But interesting thing was in the actual YouTube video where the results in the ad week was only 41% of what happened on the premiere day, but they were 250% of what happened after. And a similar spike in the watch time. So the watch time was much lower than on the premiere week, but much higher it was after. So, I guess the important part now is to interpret those results and how I see this. So obviously the podcast, the website itself, people were directly hitting it. So you see those huge numbers going up. But interesting is a discrepancy between the audio version of the podcast and the video version of the podcast. And I think there's two things. So first of all, clearly you can't match your organic YouTube algorithm promotion with what you're doing with ads, because that initial spike was much higher. But then once that weathered out, then I saw the good results on the on the Facebook ads. Now, why audio version is not following that? Well, who knows? I think that the answer is that video version is much easier to consume straight away. Once the people get there, they click and they watch. While on the podcast, they probably tend to just bookmark the thing and just come back later. And this is what I saw with that the listenership on the podcast is kind of more, at least in my case, it's kind of more of a slow burn, that you have a certain spike at the premiere and then it kind of keeps tipping away and gathers a number of views and number of watch time hours after a while. So I would expect to also see increased listenership over time, but not immediately versus YouTube. So this is my interpretation of those results. And always, the question is it worthy? To be honest, I got the better results than I thought, because especially I pretty much gave up on Facebook. It is like automated posts of what I'm doing on Facebook. In an odd chance of like you guys mentioned, someone will share that with their people and they have like 1,000 friends and they share your podcast and then they like it, right? So this is what I do. So yeah, I'm not gonna be running that again, but I think that I got results that were better than I thought.
Let's hold that thought for a moment, because I'm aware that Zoom is about to cut us out, but I think there is some discussion to be had on all this. So I'd like to connect with you all again in just a few moments' time. So what I will do is I will just put us on pause for a moment. If you're watching on YouTube right now, put us on pause, and then we will come back in a sec once we've all reconnected. So let's go through that process now.
Boom.
No, then in
We're back.
with you. We've got some heads slightly off the screen. Can you guys lean over a little bit?
Okay. Everybody just lean slightly to the right or left. Either way, Michael.
Oh, I'm trying to do the camera smooth. Be slick
There we
about
go.
it.
There we go.
Be all smooth.
Phil, can you move your head a little more? There we go. Oh, actually, we've all got you on different cameras now. Okay, well, you'll have to work out who
I know
everyone is
it's
again.
not intuitive, left and right.
That's soon for us. We'll get there. Okay, great. Listen, Tommy, I'm looking at you now thinking you're Phil, but you're Tommy. Thank you so much for
Oh,
that.
yeah,
I think there
actually.
is so much that is coming out.
Cross promotion. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm Tommy from Tommy's Outdoor.
Let me run through my slides now, just to run through what I did. Now, what you guys have done is you targeted really well from what I'm getting here, and we'll talk about this in a sec, as you kind of said, look, how can I get these people to react rather than just trying to get people to subscribe? And what my sort of attempt to do was to sort of take this myth, which was you just put an advert out there on Facebook and people will subscribe to your podcast, and see whether it works. And I love the way that you're shaking your head immediately, Michael, because let's just have a quick look at the results of that. All this stuff has been in previous episodes as well, but just to run through it fairly quickly on these slides. So I put 2 adverts out there. Wrong one. See if we can get the right one. The first one was this plain, simple logo with a few words, which a lot of people have done. And then I did the pineapple one, which was using something a bit more comedic. So I tried the 2 of them, ran them at the same time to see what kind of result it got. And I tried to focus on using these Ogilvy techniques, who's like this guy who was kind of the grandfather of advertising. And I ran through how I was approaching it, how I was kind of trying to do it, with all the stuff on the internet that said this is how you make an ad, to see whether it actually worked. Facebook Ad Manager, one of the things to watch out for here is to be careful, because the default budget it set was £350 per day to run indefinitely, which scared the out of me when I first did it, but luckily the ad hadn't gone live, so I stopped that pretty quick. One of the problems that I found, and we'll talk about this in a sec, is that there's no really good way to see how much of this is converting to a specific subscription. It's hard to put a figure exactly on it, and I added bit.ly links and things like that to try and see how many people are actually clicking on a link to go to subscribe, but it's really hard to track that down. Also, Facebook defined the ads as being fairly poor quality, whether that's because people weren't reacting to it or whether their algorithm said it or whatever is very hard to know. The general gist of it, and you can see this if you want to press pause on this playback of the video as well, is that it cost a lot of money and achieved very little. In fact, my figures, we're hearing from Michael a little bit earlier there, I reckon it was about $5 per subscriber, which is absolutely enormous, unless, of course, you know what your return on investment is. If you know that you're paying £5, I think, for an advert, but you're getting £10 back, then you know that it's probably worthwhile. The other problem as well is in terms of experimenting. I was talking on the last panel show where we talked about advertising with someone who had some success with Facebook ads, but they put a lot of money into it to try and find the exact terms that were working. So for the average independent podcaster who doesn't have a lot of money to spend, to me, that means fairly clearly that it just doesn't work. The other problem as well, and this was a really interesting thing I've been picking up from everyone else in the discussion so far, is that it's that jump between someone looking at Facebook and someone subscribing to a podcast. If they're looking at Facebook, do they really honestly want to subscribe to a podcast right now, listen to it? Because they're probably just flicking through. They could be on the train. They could be watching TV. So it's a big ask to get them to then go and listen to the podcast, was my feeling. The other thing that, I don't know whether you heard this in my episode, was I had a look at how much interaction Wondery and Gimlet and companies like that were using with Facebook now, and most of the stuff they were doing was at the beginning of last year, and then it just stopped. And they weren't even doing much then. So the only conclusion I could come from that was they weren't getting much reaction. In fact, on Twitter, I'm getting more engagement on my posts than these huge podcasters were getting on Facebook. So there was something quite interesting going on there as well. The other ones I've looked at as well was Podcorn, and I'd be interested to know if any of the guys have tried this as well. The lowest bracket I saw on there was for, and this is where it's kind of a marketplace, you reach out, a bit like Phil was saying, but you reach out to podcasts and say, I'm prepared to offer this amount of money and then see whether people go, yeah, I'd love to run your ad for you. But the lowest bracket on there was, I think it was $5,000 US. So I don't know whether you can do it smaller than that. I haven't tried that yet. And Spotify, I found out today, don't know whether you saw my social media update during the week where I said that I hadn't heard anything back from Spotify. They came back to me today and said, the reason I can't sign up to use the ad platform is because I'm in the UK and I need a VAT number, so I need a business registration number to be able to do that. The same is the problem for Spain as well. So those are some of my findings. Let's take it back to everyone else there. I think the first thing I get from that is the idea that you go onto Facebook, they've got this highly targeted system, and you say, subscribe to my podcast, is going to deliver anything really useful as a result, is a complete waste of time. Do we agree on that?
Yeah. If you
Yeah. Phil, I'll let you go first.
So what I've talked with a lot of digital marketers on my podcast, and one of them actually said it takes 7 adverts, someone to see 7 adverts to subscribe or actually purchase your product. So I think the idea that Facebook is the #1 place where podcasters can go, because podcasting is now still new. Like, I started podcasting during the original bump with true crime, and now we're kind of like in the second bump, I would say, because of Joe Rogan's getting that ridiculous deal with Spotify. Now everybody's like, oh, I can make that kind of money and Spotify's going to pay me. And so they're thinking, well, I saw people do it on Facebook, I'm going to use Facebook. But Facebook is for merchandise, for businesses. Yeah. So if you're not running your podcast like a business, it's not worth it. It's better to go to this, for me, smaller podcasts and just pay that smaller fee, something that's easy. $50 a month is pretty easy for most people to save, and just give it to 3 or 4 podcasts to see if that works. That's a smaller test. And once you get the numbers there, then you can go into to Facebook and then actually spend that good money, that Facebook money, and get that Facebook money back. So I think that's all it is. Is it too big an
ask to get people to try and subscribe from a Facebook ad?
I don't think you're trying to get them to subscribe directly to your podcast. I think you want them to listen to the episode and let the episode subscribe. Get them to subscribe. Because if you're asking someone to subscribe, you're asking for a lot. You're asking them to leave Facebook, go to another platform, hit subscribe. Whereas if you're just like, hey, give a listen to my episode, let me know if you like it. That way you're kind of like, I'm not obligating you to do anything. You can listen to it or not. And if you listen to it, you like it, you subscribe.
Yeah, Mike, I'm seeing you nodding on that one as well.
Yeah. Look, Phil, you hit the nail on the head here. Asking people to subscribe to the podcast without anything else is just like asking them to buy a cat in a bag. And then on top of that, they have to solve this riddle of like, which button do I click? Where do I go? And which doesn't make sense at all. And I agree completely. You advertise an episode, and if people like this episode, and like you said, 1 time, 3 times, if they listen to your episode for a 3rd time because they like it, they will go ahead and subscribe, probably. And another thing on the subscribers is, I don't really care that much about the subscribers. And obviously, I don't want this to sound bad. I care about people who subscribe to my podcast. They're my people, right? They're my tribe. I love them. But I don't, there's a lot of people who subscribe on many platforms to your podcast. There's many people who just subscribe and then forgot and never listened to your podcast at all. So podcast, number of subscriptions is kind of like a lag measure, if you like. It's good to have them eventually, but there's definitely not something I would focus and ask people to subscribe right now. Just like Phil said, like, here's my product, here's my episode, here's format. If you like it, great. And on top of that, if you're talking about monetizing your podcast further down the line, all those agencies, they're usually asking about the number of downloads, number of hours people were consuming your content, rather than a subscription. So I always gonna take like a numbers of hours and hours of people consuming my content versus subscribers. So as far as I'm concerned, I can have 0 subscribers if people listen to my podcast.
So let's try and find a way to make advertising work. I mean, it's very interesting what you said there, Tommy, about the fact that you took people through to a page on your website rather than trying to get them to go to the podcast, because I think that's a far easier ask, isn't it, to someone that's already just browsing Facebook and they're just going to have a look at another web page. Michael, what were you thinking there?
Well, I think that what you really need to focus on is what is the audience programmed to do in the medium that you are trying to reach them in. So what I think I took away from Facebook was I had this false impression that people who went to my events because they were scrolling through Facebook and the algorithm would tell them, oh, you like these things, you would probably like going to this live thing that's happening near you, would translate to, oh, you like this thing, here, listen to this thing that's going on. And so what I saw better success on was getting people to view those things that were on there instead of getting a call to action from them. So I would say that, yes, if you are trying to get people to engage with you and you are wanting to get more views, get people there, make sure whatever that interaction is leading them to the thing that they are already pre-programmed to do. So as we've talked about, whether that's with Spotify, I mean, the Twitter thing you're mentioning is really interesting, that people on Twitter are the type of person that is more likely to click on a link and then go interact with whatever that piece of thing is. But for me, Facebook has not translated well to, oh, here's this really interesting piece of, even though my 15-second clips were getting 50% playthroughs on what they were doing, it still wasn't translating to people either hitting the website, hitting YouTube, hitting wherever they were going through. So my question for the group to take over a little bit, Richard, is just, do each of you guys at the end of your is that where you make your ask for subscriptions for people, or do you even make an ask as part of your podcast?
No, I go first.
Please.
I absolutely. Yeah, I just think that my podcast is, people will like it, they will subscribe. So I'm not trying to do it. Like everybody, like you said, everybody's already pre-programmed to do the subscribe and hit the like button and all these. So people know, and I always look like for myself. If I'm looking something, if I'm watching something, if I'm listening something, if I like it, I will subscribe. I will hit the like button. It's seldom that someone will tell me, "Oh, subscribe," and I will subscribe what I wouldn't otherwise. It seldom happens.
It's interesting, isn't it, at what stage you do that ask or not at all, as you're just saying there. Because when I did my test, I wanted to see that sort of idea that all you do is ask people to subscribe, and that clearly doesn't work. So it's at what stage? I like that. That's interesting, Tommy, that you say you don't even ask. But do you sometimes have to prompt people still so that they then go, actually, I really do like that. Maybe I should click subscribe?
Yeah, it's interesting. My thing is I like the engagement through social media with what's going on, and people know what to expect from me. And like I said, I'm a little bit specific because there's a very broad range of problems I'm talking to. And I know good and well that, like I said, people who are very interested in wildlife conservation and bringing, extirpated species and stuff like that, they usually, by definition, not the people who will, run around with a gun and hunt deer. The opposite. They sometimes hate the other ones, right? And so I'm aware of that, and I'm targeting specific episodes depending on the subject.
Phil,
I don't know if I answer your question, but
Phil, I really want to know your thoughts on this one about where do we put the ask, or
so,
if at all.
In my previous show, the Phil Better Show, I would, at the end of every episode, just like every YouTuber, just like every podcaster, subscribe to me on this, and this, or find me on this, and this. And I didn't really see any pops on my social media. Not that I was doing anything specific. However, in this podcast, the Invest in Yourself podcast, I stopped asking for people to subscribe to me, and I asked them, if you found value in the episode, to share it with one of your friends. Now I'm not asking them to do something big. I'm asking them to just let them be my ad in essence by telling their friends. And I have seen some spikes, not like huge. I don't know if it's related to that, but I'm finding that seems more genuine because it's like, look, if you found value, you're going to know someone who will find value in this. And if they share it, and then they become a subscriber. So I'm like trying to turn each of my listeners into my own advertising by just asking them to share it. And going back to Twitter, Richard, when you were mentioning that Twitter, you've seen the most engagement. I have a buddy of mine who I'm working with. He's a data scientist, and he's scraping Twitter for me right now for podcasts so that I can see where I can engage with those podcasters and see what they're doing. In essence, I'm trying to steal their ideas, but I'm going to be sharing it too because I'm like
modeling them, Phil. You're modeling them.
I'm modeling. Yeah, you're right. I'm modeling.
Yeah, that's not stealing. No.
That's modeling. Yeah, I'm admiring their work and seeing if I can use it to me.
Yeah, standing on the shoulders of giants that came before me.
Yeah, I'm just resting on their shoulders. But I think with podcasting, instead of looking at it as like a regular business, you have to look at like a radio station. You have to treat it exactly like a radio station. And by doing audio ads, I guess my next stage is modeling it completely after what a radio does. Like, how do they do their advertising? How do they do their, like, get people to listen to the radio? What do they do? I think I'm going to try and start modeling it after them, because I think a podcast is just a radio show. It's the new form of a radio show. So we should be looking at what they're doing and implementing it on ours.
So let's try and sort of wrap this all up and kind of come up almost with a formula of what people can try and do to approach advertising if they want to put money into promoting their podcast. How should we kind of come up with that formula? So the first thing I'm getting is don't ask them to subscribe. Get them to some, perhaps, you can correct me if you think this is wrong, but get them to some information which helps to kind of add to that experience that they might want to learn more about. And from that, then get them to some links to some media. Is that the way we should do it? Is there a better way from that initial advert?
I think I'll try and answer this. In my opinion, I think doing it that way, like having that engagement and asking them to join, like check out my website or check out the Twitter so that they can see more engagement and see, okay, this is what this person's like, this is what this person does. Okay, this is something I'm interested in. Like in Tommy's case, or Phil Better, depending on how you want to look at it. He hits a varied different things. He has this conservation podcast episodes, but he also has those episodes which conservative or whatever hunters would love versus someone who wants to save the world. If he shows the hunting episodes to someone who wants to save the world, he's not going to get a follower. Versus if he shows them the conversation, hey, I had a conversation with a salmon guy. He's showing you how to reintroduce salmon into the world. Now, people who want to save the world are going to be more interested in watching that, and specifically fishermen could be more interested in that because it's like, oh, this is what the society is doing to help me be a better fisherman or whatever. And if he enjoys that, then he's like, okay, let's see what, or she, sorry.
So let's see what other episodes. Any mention of the podcast at all, aren't we?
Yeah, you leave, personally, I think just telling them what the episode's about and where they can listen to it if they're interested in it. Give them
almost so you can get a fact sheet with more information. It's almost that line.
Yeah. Just get them, if you can move them to your website, then you have more info on them because you can add Google Analytics, Facebook Pixel to it, and then you have all that info that they're doing and you're getting that info for yourself. You're not paying for it. You're getting, they're free subjects, right? So you have all that info and then you're like, okay, they're on my page. This is the episode that's doing great because it's about hunting or something. So I know, okay, this is an episode. All right, let's see if I do an ad about this, if I can garner more downloads, and then if it will translate into subscribers. Because you have to remember, podcast is forever. It's not like TV. It's not like radio anymore. Podcasts last forever. So your past episodes, you have to be able to rehash them. And I've been actually seeing one of my past episodes where I have the founder of a podcast network. He gives tips on how he got there. And anytime someone's asking for promotion, I talk about one or two of his tips and then leave the link to that episode. And I've seen an increase in his episode. So I'm thinking maybe that's the better way to advertise. Instead of paying for it, why not just go into podcast groups or groups that are specific about the topic and just join those communities? I'm seeing a lot more in that.
Yeah, I have to say, I'm seeing far more reaction in terms of doing social media and reaching out to people than I do in any kind of advertising. Now, we know, Tommy, that you agree with this kind of approach of taking to the website and giving them more value. Michael, your thoughts, though? Is this the way to do it? Do we, if we want to buy an advert, give them extra information rather than sell them a podcast?
I would say that the goal for you is to try and make whatever it is that you're packaging, whatever it is you're putting together, immediately apparent to the person that's going to interact with it. I'm just looking at my downloads. My number one download by a huge margin right now is creative financing during COVID. And that is actually an episode I've paid very little attention to as far as promoting it, doing things to it, putting it out there. But it's my number one episode. And I think it is down to those basics that, everybody that gets into podcasting thinks about, like, okay, what's my episode title going to be? What's the description going to be? How are those keywords then going to cause somebody to, get active, get involved, and interact with whatever it is I'm trying to do? I think that, to piggyback off Phil, we always know that word of mouth is a way better return on any dollars that you can spend. And so maybe the way for anybody that's looking on how do I, spend money in order to get people is to say, well, what is my time worth? If the value of my time is $10 an hour, $100 an hour, I'm going to invest $100, today. And I'm going to go onto a bunch of support boards. I'm going to go look for people that are in my demographic, that are in my area of interest. And I'm not going to push. I'm going to look for the things related to this thing that I want to go out and say, hey, I see that you also were doing this. How has that worked out for you? I spoke to this guy. It was here. He had a lot of great tips. You're welcome to listen to what he had to say. I think you would find it valuable. If you do that for an hour, have 25 interactions, especially in a place that is on a post that lives, that breathes, I think you'll for sure get a return out of it. I don't know what your return is going to be, but you'll get a return. The other traditional marketing piece that I am exploring right now is, again, I've got these 200, 300 people that have attended my live events. I should be doing a better job of turning that into a mailing list out of my email that I should be just not pushing anything, just reminding them, like, hey, have you struggled with financing during COVID? Here are the problems that everybody's talking about. Here's what's going on. If you're interested, I did have this interview with this person that they wanted to talk about stuff. I mean, a lot of the other podcasters I see out there are very explicit, like, new episode today. Here's what it is. Go do this. And that's not my style. And so I think that for me, it's being the trusted resource in my area of expertise, having people that want to get information from me, and then being able to share that information that way. For me, but again, that's not spending cash, that's spending my time. And as we've all experienced, setting up these ads takes a long time. And so if I'm going to spend that exact same amount of time doing something that's more organic, or that's something that is going to be building my list of people that are aware of stuff, I'm probably going to be investing in that rather than trusting an algorithm who is trying to get a result that may not be what I want it to be. Yes, it's going to get in front of people. I mean, I'm looking at some of my ads. I got 1,500 people that looked at one of the ads that I spent $10 on. That's great. Only got me two clicks.
Yeah.
Not a great rate of return.
It's really interesting. One of my biggest bugbears, the things that really annoys me, is when you see on Twitter, on social media, listen to my episode, and I feel like replying to everyone going, well, what's in it? Yeah. Why? Tell me why I should spend half an hour listening to your episode. Because if you don't even give me a tease to tell me what's there, what value I'm going to get, why am I going to sit down and press play on that? I've got plenty of other things to do. Let's round it up then. So for your average new podcaster who has heard the idea out there that you can spend some money on Facebook ads to buy subscribers by asking people to subscribe, with a thumb up or a thumb down, are we going to give it a thumb up or a thumb down? I know what mine is. Tommy, can't see your hand.
I just tried to get my hand in the frame.
Yeah, well and truly, it's a total thumbs down on that one. And the message I'm getting as well is that social media is the place to really, if you're starting off, is the place to start. Put your time and effort into that, and that's probably going to get a better return. Yeah.
So I just want to say one thing. So I did a test, a very bad test, but a test anyways. I put my link in 3 different groups, podcast groups that were talking about promotion. And this was back on the 29th of January. And just from those 3 posts, and I hadn't posted any episodes or anything like that, I specifically only did those, I got 47 total downloads and 34 unique downloads. So that's coming out to, with 3 posts, that's about, what, nearly 10 listens just from those 3 posts.
And that took you how long?
That took me maybe 10 minutes, 20 minutes. It was throughout the day, pretty much. Like, unfortunately, it doesn't give me the timestamps, and I wish, hopefully one day we'll get to that point because we're so new with the podcast hosting. But it's showing me that 29% of or 30% of the listens came from a Facebook post. Like, and then there was people were listening through Chrome, Apple Podcasts, Safari, and then Amazon Music. Amazon Music has been amazing, actually.
Yeah, I was actually just going to say something for new podcast listeners out there, Richard, that I didn't even connect with. Was it's way more important when you put stuff out there to also have your website up as well, because I was unprepared for how many listeners are coming through Chrome. I figured because I consume content on my cell phone that's where everybody was going to be coming from, and that is 74% of my listeners are on a PC. Listening to,
so do you think they're finding you through your website, or is it that they're hearing about the podcast and then searching for you?
No, it's not organic searching. It is people. It's my guests informing people. Here's where to go. Here's what to do. And they're listening through the website instead of going through any of the podcasting apps. So they're clicking through to the website on the engagement information I'm giving. Which again, keep in mind for any of the listeners, my style of show is an interview style. So it's not a true crime, there's not episodic or anything going on. So what I'm doing is before my episode goes out, I'm sending, examples of posts, I'm sending content, I'm sending links to my guests and saying, hey, your episode is going up here in 3 days. Reminder, your episode's going up tomorrow. Your episode goes up today. Here's the information that you can choose to share. They're sending it out to their email lists and they're sending it out on their social media. And that's how people are then landing on my website. And I will give a plug. Podpage was a great little service I used for a website. It took me all of 30 minutes total to get everything up, and my streams come in and everything works, and it was a huge saver because I was ready to go down Tommy's road and do a WordPress site, and that was very overwhelming for me as someone that does not have the time to learn how to make templates and do all this sort of stuff that was going on.
Let me just give you the opportunity to plug your podcast a final time. So let's just run through them. And also, because obviously we've got the names wrong on the captions now, which I will adjust.
Except for Michael. Michael seems to be the only one that's safe.
Because Tommy is Phil and Phil is Tommy. So let's just give you the opportunity to say it in words. Who you are, where to find out more about you. Let's start off with Phil Better, or more correctly, Tommy in this particular case. Tommy, where do people find out more about you?
Yeah, so Tommy'sOutdoors.com is my website. From there, you got links to my socials and to YouTube and any and all podcasting platforms. I talk about everything that's related to outdoors, both outdoor pursuits as well as wildlife conservation, nature, habitat protection, and stuff like that. A lot of discussions with scientists, ecologists, as well as outdoorsmen, hunters, anglers, and quite often those scientists are also hunters and anglers. Yeah.
Wonderful. Enjoy. Michael, we have actually got your name correct on your shot here.
I'm Michael Liddicoat. My website is dissectingthedeal.com, and we interview real estate investors, and we talk about a deal. How did they find it? How did they fund it? How did they make money doing that? And we try and keep these to just 30 minutes, 40-minute episodes to make them bite-sized for people to keep encouraged about wanting to get into real estate and see that it's possible for anybody that wants to invest.
Superb. And Phil?
I'm Phil Bitter, aka Tommy Outdoors. I host the Invest in Yourself, the Digital Entrepreneur podcast. It's a podcast where, since I have always wanted to figure out how to be an entrepreneur, I decided, hey, let's interview people who are actually doing it and know how to do it. So I'm looking at how different entrepreneurs have made it in the digital space. You can go to investinyourselfpod.com. You have all the links to all the episodes there. I promise it will become a better website, because I listening to the two gentlemen who have probably more experience than I am. Websites are the way to go, so I'm gonna beef up that website to make it nicer. But yeah, I have interviews with someone changing the game in digital networking. Was my first episode, and Richard has been a guest talking about his experience making a hit podcast. So if you're a podcaster, that's a great episode to listen to. But big news, I'm going to announce it here. I actually have, for my season 2 finale, Dom Inhart, the founder and creator of a Unicron, startup incubator and accelerator out in France. Mm-hmm. And he's been a digital entrepreneur for over 25 years, since the early 90s, helping artists with selling their art online. So through podcasting, I got to meet him, and there's a potential for a huge season 3 guest that I don't want to announce yet because it's not recorded.
Well, listen, thank you so much for joining us today. You know, it's really interesting to speak to so many different people and bounce off ideas as well, because I think there is so many, you know, I think I've said to all of you that the reason I started this is because I was getting so angry with all the different myths and ideas out there that just seem to promise this instant success with podcasting. And I just wanted to say what actually works by testing it and talking to people who actually tried it. So thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your experiences on that one. I think we could talk about a lot of other topics as well, because I think there's so much experience, so we should definitely do it again. So thank you very much for your time. I hope you have found this really useful as well. I will be changing the names on the video after this to make sure that Tommy and Phil get corrected, and I will release it on YouTube. Also, of course, in the usual places for my podcast, CanIMakeAHitPodcast.com, and you'll get an audio version of this as well coming out on the podcast feed too. Thank you very much for joining us, and we will do this again as well.
All right, thanks guys.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.